Let's talk about CSS, cascading style sheets. But first, let's mention we have a standard HTML page with elements that include head, body, header, section, and footer to compose the page structure. CSS is what gives the page its appearance. We can apply spacing, color, fonts, and more. Styles can be applied by adding style properties directly to elements inside of our HTML file, but best practice dictates they should be applied by linking to an external style sheet. External style sheets can be stored anywhere and named anything, but to adhere to best practice, we name it style.css and reference it in a subfolder relative to the location of our main HTML file. We have a style sheet with a couple of selectors to get us started. We have the asterisk that gives properties to set the outer area of the page in such a way to remove any invisible surrounding space. We also have a selector for the body with properties to maintain consistent font and background color. One way to set the color is by using one of many color keywords that designate a specific color value. More on that a little later. When we look at the appearance of our web page, we see it works, but it is plain without any styling. Let's add the first style selector to the header. We can add padding, that's additional space within the border of the element on all sides to give it some space. We already know that padding can be added to an element in different ways, but here we will individually identify distance for top, right, bottom, and left, making left larger to have it stand out. Let's take another look at our web page and refresh the page to see the selector has added space around the header. We can also apply the same style to different elements by separating them by a comma. In this case, we add nav, section, and footer to have the same padding applied as the header. After we save the style sheet, let's return to the browser and refresh the page. We now see there is padding around the elements identified in our style sheet, giving the page a considerably different appearance. Speaking more about page appearance, let's return to the CSS file to talk a little about how selectors take precedence. Something important to keep in mind: if there are duplicate selectors with an identical attribute in different areas of the code, the latest or last selector will be used. Here we can demonstrate by using the header and footer. We set the background color using hexadecimal values instead of color keyword to specify color for clear distinction. To show the latest selector takes precedence, we add padding again for top, right, bottom, and left. This time we add a much larger margin to show that it takes precedence over the first selector. It's not because the number is larger, but because it comes after the first identical selector. Let's return to the browser to see our page looks considerably different since the latest declarations takes precedence. Note to always be mindful of where your selectors are. We can return to our CSS file and remove the extra padding since we no longer need it. Next, we want to set a style for an element that sits inside of another. In our case, it is an H2 element sitting inside a section. To do this, we can add a declaration for the section element, then, without a comma, add H2. Let's give it a different color. This time, instead of using color keyword or hexadecimals, we use RGB, red, green, blue values, to set the color. Our style cascades through the hierarchy, targets the H2 element, and changes to the color we want. We can go back to add more selectors. Let's add a margin, space outside the borders of the element, for the article. Similar to padding, the margin can be entered in different ways, but here we will enter by individually specifying margins for top, right, bottom, and finally left. We can make the bottom 20 pixels to help it stand out a little more. To finish out, let's add a little bit of space for the footer using the line height property. We put 1.5 without a specified unit like px or %. This format multiplies this number by the element's font size to calculate the height or distance between lines of text. This serves as an example of the many properties that can be applied. In our browser, we see the styles have been applied. However, we may not want to have our navigation bar indented from the left. The point here is we can target and adjust the appearance as needed. Back in our style sheet, we can remove nav from the list of selectors for applied padding. When we do, we see the appearance for the navigation area updates to reflect our change. We use CSS to give a web page its appearance by applying spacing, color, fonts, and more. There are different ways to apply styles, as demonstrated with applying color differently, but it is best practice to remain consistent. We also have seen that later selector declarations take precedence over identical declarations made earlier. We must be mindful of how we name and order our selectors, as this will affect how the styles are applied to the page. Remember to explore this and other examples to see how they work. Thank you for watching.